Nagesh Bashyam. My nickname is Dragon, as people call me. I don't breathe fire, but that's my nickname anyway. I work for Harris Corporation. I'm here to talk about an interoperability platform. Specifically, it is about Connect and NHIN. And thanks to Dave Riley, yesterday he gave us such a fabulous introduction to Connect. And what I would like to give you is a slightly different perspective of Connect and say that, how can Connect be used to solve some of the real-world problems that are out there today? We have, like Fred gave an excellent introduction yesterday on patient-centric healthcare. A lot of speakers have talked about it. In order to actually, get to that level of, patient-centric healthcare or evidence-based care, you really need to start gathering information or moving information from point A to point B, which doesn't happen right away. And there is a lot of infrastructure and plumbing work that needs to go on in the real world to actually make that happen. That's where Connect can actually play a very important role in solving some of the real world problems. So, and to tie it all, I'll be talking about open source, Connect, and how they interact together to provide an interoperability platform. And lastly, I'll be providing some overview of how we can actually come in and participate in the Connect community and start contributing to various projects that we have going on. So with that, open source and health IT. You can go ahead and start clicking on a link on the Wikipedia, which basically lists what are all the open source projects that are out there in the healthcare. If you go ahead and look at it, you'll be surprised how many healthcare open source projects which are out there. And like Fred and many of the Vista people mentioned, healthcare started doing open source even before open source was called open source. So you have more projects than you can imagine. But one of the interesting things that you can see when you click on when you click on the wiki link, something is wrong in the animation there, but looks like I lost some text there somehow, but that's okay. So one of the things that you'll see on the Wikipedia is there is more than 20 plus categories of healthcare disciplines. And each discipline has a ton of open source projects. Whereas if you compare it to some other domain, you might not have so many subdomains within the master domain. That by itself is a very complex problem that people need to comprehend. That's why it becomes so hard in healthcare to develop interoperability and open source projects. The other big thing that you can see is there are hundreds of projects and products that have been developed in the open source community, but how many of them are really successful? How many of them are really adding value to the community? If you look at that particular aspect, you might see Mirth, Connect, Vista being one of them, OpenEMR, OpenMRS. There's a handful of them which are really successful, but not all of them. Many of them actually have either failed or not being used because they don't provide any clinical value of relevance to the end organization. That's where we need to start thinking. We need to start providing solutions that actually deliver value and interoperate with each other. That's where we need to go in terms of open source and health IT. So the next thing is, what does it take to actually interoperate between organizations? Well, that's where standards start coming in. Without standards, you can't really achieve interoperability. A simple example is, we've talked a lot about Vista, right? Vista is one of the most successful EHR implementations. Well, Vista has an EHR implementation that is used by VA and VA hospitals. DoD, on the other hand, has its own version of an EHR called Alta. And guess what? Initially, they didn't start sharing information with each other, right? So a service member who actually goes to a VA hospital to get some care, suddenly if they require information to be pulled out of the DoD system, they can't get it right away. So what do we do, right? Well, VA and DoD are big enough that they introduced a new project called BHI, for example. That's one of the many projects, right? BHI is a bidirectional health information exchange. It basically helps to move data between the two systems to collaborate and coordinate so that people who are actually treating the patients can get the information that they need and treat the patient properly, right? Well, but what happens if the service member had actually been treated in a private hospital? You can't instantiate a new BHI for every facility that the person visited, right? So you can't go on instantiating new projects to solve the problem of interoperability. That's where VA and DoD and many of the other federal agencies came together and said, we need to start developing some standards around this interaction. Right? So you need to I'm not sure what happened to my animation, but that's okay. So we need to start open source solutions with standards. That is the most important thing that we need to do. The next thing is taking it to a next level, right? If you think about two hospitals trying to communicate, think about many organizations within an enterprise and many organizations with many sub-departments within that enterprise trying to communicate and pull data from each other, like an inpatient department trying to get data out of a lab system, or a lab system trying to send data to an outpatient system. There is a complex set of interactions that go on within a hospital, like Will mentioned in the previous presentation. He had a circle of point-to-point connection. I have a rectangle of point-to-point connections. Either way, they don't work. It's not sustainable over time. It will all fall apart, right? So we need to, and that's where standards again start playing an important role. And to amplify it, if you start thinking multiple enterprises, multiple departments, you can't even draw the lines. You can't even think about the complexity of integration. So you can't really transform health IT without open standards. And the standards need to be open so that everybody can adopt it, not just an organization like me. Like for example, Vista was a great implementation, but was not adopted that widely across the entire healthcare spectrum. So you need open standards and open implementation that can span the entire spectrum of the exchange. The next thing that you can talk about is, let's say we start developing standards. Where do we go from there? Well, the next thing that all the speakers, from yesterday to today have talked about is health innovation, change, social change. How do we change our paradigm of health IT and so on, right? Let's think about some of the things that have changed our world in the last few years. Social media, mobile devices. Nobody lives without Twittering or tweeting, having Facebook, and so on and so forth, right? Well, all of this happened because of a fundamental thing, right? There's a need for communication, and there is a platform and a set of standards that are enabling that change to happen. And that's an important thing to remember. You cannot actually innovate or change. Social change doesn't come about if you don't have an environment that fosters it. In order to do that, you need to come up with a platform that can actually support that kind of innovation. And that's where Connect comes in. I have the Connect logo up here, but people may not see it. So Connect is that kind of a platform which can actually start providing the framework that you need in order to bring about the change that you desire in the population or in the social or in the society. Right. So let's get into some more details about Connect. Well, what does Connect do? The very first thing that it solves is essentially interaction between agencies or organizations or departments within an enterprise. So if you think of like many of these agencies that are candidates and want to interact and share health information, Connect basically provides a set of services and standards that can be used at an enterprise level between organizations or within an organization to say, how can I move information effectively? So you come up with a set of enterprise services. Some of them are listed here, like discovery of patients. But I want to figure out the patient first, and then I want to retrieve information, query for information about the patient, retrieve information, audit, opt-in, opt-out, consumer preferences, so on and so forth. So you have a bunch of services which actually enable the basic information flow between entities. And that's basically what the NHIN exchange and the services and the standards that are created by the NHIN exchange provide. Connect. I really didn't close it. Not recovered it. Okay, we start over. Sorry, I have to click through all of this, but I've used that slide in the last 3 conferences that I've been to, believe me. So that is not a new slide that I created for this conference. I'll skip that slide now. What's that? I guess I used a Windows operating system. It does not interoperate with the Open Office, I guess.
Seriously, it's that Oracle logo that you got on the bottom of your
Oracle logo, huh? Oh. So anyway, well, let me see. Well, that's how it looks, essentially. We'll change it. Technology problems, right? Small problem. So the Connect essentially is a reference implementation of all the NHIN exchange standards and services. What it does allow you, it's real software, by the way. It's not just documentation or specs or anything. It's real software. Connect is real software that runs. So it's okay. So Connect is a reference implementation of the NHIN exchange services and standards that can be used to actually start communicating between enterprises, within enterprises, and so on. Now let's see if this slideshow works again. Okay. Just as a definition, NHIN exchange, like Dave talked about yesterday, is a set of standards and services and policies that basically enable health information movement over the internet. Now, NHIN exchange connects a set of organizations, private, public, federal agencies, to participate in this exchange. The important concept being there is the establishment of trust, like Dave talked about yesterday, which is you need to sign a DERSA, you need to go through an onboarding process, you need to agree to the principles of the information exchange, because privacy is such an important concept that you need to do, and you need to protect the patient's health information. Right. So there's a whole process that you go through to actually get onboarded onto the NHIN and participate in the NHIN exchange. The other big aspect is, Connect, like VA and DoD and SSA are, they realize the importance of health information sharing, and they basically funded, an open source project, which is called Connect right now, to implement the NHIN exchange standards and services. And it's a cool concept to actually have collaboration between private and public entities. And this is, like one of the first few ones that have been done in this way, which have been very successful, thanks to the leadership of Dave and others. Right. Okay, so now how can we actually start using Connect in the real world? That's kind of the meat of the issue here, right? So you can think of Connect as a platform for participation. And when I say participation, it's participating in health information exchange, which is meaningful and improves patient health care. Right? So what Connect does is it does not replace, or it does not ask you to go replace your existing infrastructure. It says you can retain your existing infrastructure, but it enables you to take it to the next level by coupling your existing infrastructure and legacy systems to open standards so that you can move information freely across the network. Right? For example, this could be two organizations, but I have Matilda and Bob who want to communicate, but they don't have a common way of communicating, just like the VA and DoD had many years back. So the very first thing that you do is basically instantiate a Connect instance within your organizations. Once you instantiate, then you can start talking. What you send across that interface is still not defined very well, but you can start communicating with each other, right? Now, the other cool thing is once you start honoring the interface and start sharing information, you can start replacing the components within your enterprise, which basically allows you to transform and change and innovate and do whatever you want to do within the organization. That takes it to the next level. The first level is enabling you to participate. The next level is allowing you to innovate and change. That's basically, the value of using Connect. So we go to innovation, right? How do you actually innovate? Once you start sharing information, now we can say you can start bringing information from many different systems to a common interface to the doctor or the provider who is providing care. For example, you can think of your existing EHR being combined with information from all the systems out on the internet and other information sources. Whether it is health alerts, registries, pharmacies, labs, payers, whatever you want. You can start sending information from all of them, receiving information from all of them, and coupling them into a unified view, and even send it to the mobile applications if you want, using some of the Google technologies that they talked about earlier. Right. The last thing that Connect does provide to innovate is you can replace your own, use your own MPI, policy engine, policies, and so on and so forth. You don't have to use what's bundled up in Connect and produced in the open source. That gives you the flexibility to actually add value-added services, essentially, when you're innovating and trying to come up with the best solution that is, that meets the customer's needs that you have. So with all of this, I'd like to summarize how we can achieve interoperability, right? Well, interoperability has two aspects to it. How do I interoperate across the organizations or inter-organizations, and how do I actually enable information within the enterprise that I'm transforming? So what Connect does is basically packages up the web services that we created, the enterprise level services, into two layers. One is called the gateway, the other is called the adapter. The gateway basically provides a common mechanism to interact with organizations which are out on the internet. So you can exchange information in a standard way using the same structure and syntax, which basically means that anybody can transport information. The adapter then comes in and says, hook this up into your internal legacy systems. That way you're not replacing every system that you have, but using them. Well, that's where Mirth actually took it to the next level. Mirth took this architecture, and they have Mirth Connect essentially is a layer of channels which connects the adapter to legacy systems, for example, or existing systems. And they even have a Mirth Match, which is an MPI. So they took all of this, bundled into an appliance, and now it's one of the most successful appliances out there that enables interoperability. So you can start thinking about those kinds of innovations and leveraging the open source product that Connect provides. A little bit about semantic interoperability. Connect does support semantic interoperability, but the way, semantic interoperability is a long journey. But in order to get there, you need to start defining content and structure and coding schemes and so on and so forth. Well, in Connect, we have something called as application profiles or transaction profiles, which allow you to define the semantic content of the payload that is being exchanged. You need to define that using standards like HL7 and CDA and so on and so forth. And you need to add constraints in order to actually meaningfully say that I am interpreting the information that you are sending me in the same way that you intended it to, not necessarily that I'm just exchanging information. This is the next level, right? Once you are able to share information, then you say, am I using the meaning of the information that I'm exchanging? Is it being interpreted the same on both ends of the spectrum? And that's where you start getting into implementation guides and a whole lot of other things which help you achieve that. And the important aspect is Connect enables all of that. It doesn't solve all the problems, but it does provide you a way to get there. Right. So the next cool thing that I want to kind of amplify is, if you think of all the standards and technologies that Connect implements, it's a huge stack. When I say huge stack, it's not a stack of technology, it's a stack of standards. And without standards, you cannot achieve interoperability. And there are two types of standards that it brings together. It brings together the technology standards and the clinical standards, because you need both of them to actually create a successful platform that can be used to innovate. And I'm not going to go through all of this. You can look at all of this. A number of profiles. And a single person cannot go off and implement all of this to achieve interoperability. That's why you want to save time and resources and money by using a platform like Connect, which implements all of this in one good package, and then further the interoperability needs of the community. And that's basically the logo there. And then I think Connect community. How do you participate and actually interact with the community? Like Dave mentioned yesterday, there is a connectopensource.org. You can access that for all the information that you need. There is webinars, training seminars, design information, architecture information, a whole lot of stuff on the website that you can get there. There is also codeathons, which are held multiple times. You can come to the codeathons. We basically do whatever the community wants. We choose a list of topics and start addressing them. And the feedback from that is, it gets into the backlog as user stories that will be, incorporated somewhere along the development roadmap. The next thing is, there is a good process for awarding commit privileges, like Dave talked about yesterday. There's a lot of useful information on that you can get. And the regular things with code repositories, Jira instances, and so on. And then there is the EHRI SIG, which is an EHR interoperability special interest group that we created, I think, a few months back. That's basically, we want to take interoperability to the next level. So all people who are interested in that, come with their use cases to this group. We meet, regularly, and then we prioritize the use cases, and we say, let's go build this thing, whatever the business use case is. So we try to prioritize the use case, we document the use case, and say, what does it take to actually go build one of these? And then we go off and build it. So That's a great way to get involved, and anybody can come in and join the group. If you want to get your hands wet and do some coding and learn Connect, you're welcome on board. That's pretty much it, and if you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to take it. Wow, nobody gives me a hard time, except for the computer, I guess.
If you're not in the healthcare field right now but are interested in learning more about it, how would you recommend?
But like I said, EHRI SIG will give you a very good.
You got your recording. Oh.
So the question is, if you're not in the healthcare, how would you recommend participating in it? In order to actually participate in Connect, EHRI SIG is a good way. That's one of the ways. That basically gives you an understanding of the domain too, because people come with real use cases and problems, and they try to express what the use case is. You can discuss the use case, and if you have coding skills or documentation skills or whatever, you can contribute there. The other way is, if you are a really code geek, then go to the code repository, pull it down, and start playing with it, right? That's another way. There is a bunch of other resources on the website that allows you the ways to participate and so on. You can look at that, post an issue, post your skill set if you want on the forum, and somebody will respond, and so on and so forth.
I'd like to add that there's opportunities if you're an expert in SAML or an expert in XSPA or something, XACML or what have you. If you remember just 2 slides back, you kind of had 2 sets of technology standards. So if you're an expert on something on the left but you don't know anything about healthcare, we still need that expertise. Because healthcare, one of the things that we suffer from is a general lack of knowledge about deep security and privacy things and how to do that well, especially in distributed systems where you've got data everywhere and you've got the need to enforce profiles about how you release that information. So if you have expertise there, we could use it. If you have expertise in any of these healthcare standards, we could use that. And if you come to the table with expertise in both, that's even better yet. But anybody that, you can find, I think, on that roadmap, a place where you can fit in and be a part of that community.
And there's a ton of third-party open source products, essentially open source products that we use for each of these things. Java, XML, a ton of packages, OpenSSO, Jericho, there's a ton of packages that we use.
You might actually just get close to the microphone so the video can hear you and re-say that basically anything to the left is an invitation to a geek of a general type, and anything to the right is an invitation to a healthcare geek that wants to get involved with open source.
Yeah.
So it's like open source to healthcare or healthcare to open source.
Great marriage. Nicely put, Fred. The question was, the question and the point that was being made is, if you have technology skills and open source skills in any of these areas and other areas, even not listed here, come. You're welcome to the party and join us. And if you know healthcare, business, and healthcare standards, healthcare use cases, you're still welcome to come. This is the perfect marriage, if you will, of healthcare standards and technology standards to actually start the innovation process. And it's one of the cool things that I got lucky to be involved in.
I had a question on the registry and the gateway monitoring. Is that part of Connect or the NIM?
Which one?
The federated registries?
That's just a standard that is used for registries to register documents in a normally there is, for example, if you have an XTSB compliant document repository, they use some standards, and that standard is based on EBREAM, EBXML.
Will it be a runtime element of the registry in Connect? Would that be part of Connect or NIM?
So everything, in terms of real software, everything is part of Connect. So the standards is what NHIN Exchange defines, and Dave can here clarify more.
I'll give you a little bit more detail, because this registry that's here is actually for the XDS document registry and document repository. And it uses the XDSB standard, which is built on the EBXML standard. The UDDI directory for discovering services is a different entity altogether. There is a NIN-level root UDDI server. And then there's a client piece that is incorporated in the runtime environment into Connect instances so that it constantly receives updates and can query against that to discover services as new organizations are added and whatever services that they're providing for that.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah. There is that UDDI standard. That's another standard that comes in. Any other questions, comments? You can talk to any of us, Dave, myself, Brian. We'll all be here the next day. So I think Dave is flying in the morning. More than welcome to stop by and ask questions. Thank you very much.